Goeiemôre en baie welkom by ons Vrydag Hoogtepunte program. Ons kyk vandag terug na 'n week vol interessante gesprekke. Politieke ontleder Roland Henwood het Suid-Afrika se stygende werkloosheidskoers kom ontleed, terwyl kliniese sielkundige Hein Hofmeyer ons gehelp het om die waarheid agter geboortevolgorde en persoonlikheid te verstaan. Ons het ook met Tatiana Tomatos in Kaïro gesels na haar goue medalje-oorwinning by die onder 17 wêreldkampioenskappe. En nasionale barista-kampioen Musa Mosikile het kom kuier. Natuurlik het ons lekker musiek gehad toe Lee Cole kom kuier het met sy nuwe enkelsnit Fool. Suid-Afrika se werkloosheidskoers het weer gestyg en staan nou op 'n skokkende 33,6%. Dit is meer as 8,5 miljoen mense wat sonder werk is. Politieke ontleder Roland Henwood was die week hier om meer te ontleed.
Baie welkom en dankie dat jy hieroor met ons gesels
Dankie,
vanoggend.
Elsa.
Goed, 'n amptelike werkloosheidskoers van 33,6%. Wat beteken so 'n syfer?
Dit beteken dat as ons gaan kyk na 8,5 miljoen mense wat werk het en ons sit met 'n 33% werkloosheidskoers, dan beteken dit daar is X miljoen mense wat nie werk het nie, maar belangriker wat nie werk kan kry nie. Ons moet gaan kyk na die konteks van daai syfer en dit is dat daar is 'n geografiese realiteit ook daarin, maar daar's ook 'n ouderdomsrealiteit daarin. Geografies gaan kyk ons na jeugwerkloosheid wat in sekere dele van Suid-Afrika by 70% is.
Sjoe.
Dit beteken jong mense wat nie 'n werk kan kry nie. En dan is daar 'n ander dimensie. As 'n mens dit gaan projekteer na 'n makroperspektief, dan is daar 'n groot klomp mense in Suid-Afrika en dit is waar daai 33% so belangrik raak, wat in hulle hele lewe nooit 'n formele werk gaan hê nie. So hulle gaan 'n hele leeftyd leef. Hulle gaan doodgaan, hulle gaan nooit 'n formele werk gehad het nie. Wat is die gevolge daarvan? Armoede, hopeloosheid.
Maar dit voel nie asof daar vreeslik vordering getoon word of gemaak word nie. Wat sê sommige van die grootste struikelblokke wat in die pad staan daarvan?
Dit is 'n beleidskwessie. En ons het nie die regte beleid om dit te doen nie. En hoe meer daar gepraat word oor werkloosheid, hoe meer sien ons dat ons vaskop met beleidsraamwerke en beleidsbeginsels wat teen werkskepping indruis. En die president praat daarvan, een van die prioriteite van die regering van nasionale eenheid is juis beleid wat ekonomiese groei gaan aanhelp, maar ons sien dit nie in praktyk nie. Trouwens, ons sien 'n gekibbel en konflik, ons sien 'n vasklou aan beleidsrigtinge, en dan kom ons by die praktyk van 'n breër beleidsraamwerk, nie net beleid wat ekonomiese groei moet ondervang nie, maar 'n breër beleidskonteks wat onder andere te doen het met wie kry wat se werk. En dan sien ons byvoorbeeld die hele debat rondom swart ekonomiese bemagtiging en alles wat daarmee ingaan. Wat ons mee in effek in Suid-Afrika sit, is nie 'n uitbreiding en groei en skep van geleenthede nie. Ons kyk na 'n herverdeling van die bestaande, kleiner wordende ekonomiese koek en daarmee saam 'n herverspreiding van die beskikbare werke. En wat is die reaksie wat ons sien uit onder andere uit die ANC ministers uit wat sê ons moet hierdie beleid strenger en beter toepas. Met ander woorde, ons gaan harder beklei vir al hoe minder. Dit is hoekom ons nie vordering maak in Suid-Afrika nie.
So watter impak dink jy gaan dit hê in aanloop tot die opkomende verkiesing?
Daar word baie keer gepraat van in metrogebiede veral dat die regte beleid, die regte regeringsoptrede help met beleggings en werkskepping. En dan kyk ons na byvoorbeeld die DA wat baie vinnig sê, maar kyk net in Kaapstad ons die laagste werkloosheidskoers, ons skep nog meer werk as wat ons verloor, en dan kontrasteer hulle dit met Johannesburg, Tshwane selfs, waar die teenoorgestelde geld. Maar in effek is dit 'n nasionale kwessie. En dit is nie 'n plaaslike regeringskwessie nie. En die vraag is in die aanloop tot die plaaslike regeringsverkiesing, gaan die fokus wees op dienslewering en op regering naby aan mense, of gaan die fokus wees op die groot nasionale kwessies? En ek dink as ons gaan kyk na hoe partye posisioneer, die DA wil, lyk dit vir my, 'n verkiesing veg op plaaslike kwessies, want hulle is sterk op dit. Die ANC wil waarskynlik nie baie praat oor plaaslike regering nie, want hulle het 'n groot gemors daarvan gemaak en hulle wil meer na nasionale kwessies gaan kyk. Maar nie in die sin van effektiewe beleidsdebat nie, maar 'n emosionele debat. En dan word dit ons hulle benadering. En dis een van die grootste uitdagings wat ons in Suid-Afrika het. Is die kwessie dat ons na onder andere die kwessie van werkloosheid as ons hulle probleem kyk. die wat het en die wat nie het nie, en dit word baie maklik skeef getrek in allerlei ander historiese denkpatrone en prosesse in. En dit help niemand in Suid-Afrika soos dit doen nie.
Ek dink is wel interessant om te kyk na die statistiek, jy weet, want wanneer 'n mens die verskillende provinsies vergelyk, dan sien 'n mens die Oos-Kaap se syfers staan op 47,5%, die Wes-Kaap op 19,5%. Wat dink jy is die gevolgtrekkings wat 'n mens kan maak wanneer 'n mens die verskillende provinsies vergelyk?
Wel, ek dink histories moet 'n mens gaan kyk na historiese ontwikkeling, die strukturele komponent, wat is waar geleë? Johannesburg wat die ekonomiese hartland of hoofstad van Suid-Afrika verteenwoordig. So daar's baie meer geld in die omgewing en dit skep bepaalde infrastruktuur en geleenthede. Die Oos-Kaap is tradisioneel 'n plattelandse en minder ontwikkelde streek, maar nou het jy ook baie swak regering daar. En dit beteken jy het in 'n tyd van oor dekades het jy nie die ontwikkeling gekry wat jy veronderstel was om te kry wat met 'n gedesentraliseerde model gepaard gaan nie. En dis een van die groot kwessies in Suid-Afrika, is dat ons het provinsies verdeel, kleiner gemaak, ons het konsise regering nader aan die mense gebring. Maar eintlik wat ons gedoen het is om nog elites te skep en nie regtig te gaan kyk na wat is die behoefte van die mense en dit aan te spreek nie.
Roland, wat is die maatskaplike impak van so iets wanneer 'n mens kyk na Suid-Afrikaanse burgers en ook die regering in 'n land wat al vir so lank met hierdie probleem te kampe het?
Wel, in eerste plek die onmiddellike effek is armoede. En ons dis 'n ander debat as net die debat oor ongelykheid. Werkloosheid is gelyk aan armoede. En daar is nie 'n stelsel om mense te ondersteun en te help nie. Dit wat ons in Suid-Afrika het is gebrekkig en dis baie duur. En want ons onthou, dit word geposisioneer op 'n al hoe kleiner wordende belastingbasis. So dis nie 'n langtermyn oplossing nie. Die langtermyn oplossing is ekonomiese beleid en regeringsbeleid wat groei en ekonomiese ontwikkeling ondervang.
Dink jy daai probleem gaan binnekort uitgesorteer word?
Nee, dis 'n langtermynprobleem en die rede hoekom dit nie vinnig uitsorteer gaan word nie is die probleem word nie aangespreek nie. Ons handel met die simptome daarvan. En nou sit ons met 'n situasie waar dit lyk asof 'n groepering het die inisiatief oorgeneem en die regering probeer opvang met hulle. Die wese van hierdie debat word nie aangespreek nie. Hoekom het ons hierdie gesindhede in Suid-Afrika en hoekom is dit toegelaat om te ontwikkel? En dit kom oor 'n baie lank, dis nie 'n nuwe ding nie. Dis toegelaat om te ontwikkel omdat daar nie ingetree is toe dit nodig was om hierdie goed te hanteer.
So wat dink jy kan nou gedoen word?
Leiding en daadwerklike optrede. Die probleem wat ons sien is 'n regering wat nou twee boodskappe stuur. Aan die een kant verskonend oor dit wat gebeur, aan die ander kant probeer om by te kom by die debat en die proses. En die twee raak wederzijds uitsluitend op 'n stadium.
En ons sien ons president is besig om 'n verskyning op sosiale media platforms te maak met allerlei neigings en so aan waaraan hy deelneem, maar nietemin ons laat dit daar. Dis dalk 'n gesprek vir 'n ander dag. Roland, baie dankie vir die insig wat jy vanoggend met ons gedeel het.
Groot plesier, baie dankie.
Bly net waar jy is. Ons kyk net hierna terug na 'n gesprek met Hein Hofmeyer oor wat die invloed van geboortevolgorde op 'n kind se persoonlikheid kan wees. Ons het almal seker al die stereotypes gehoor. Die oudste kind is die verantwoordelike een. Die middelkind is die een wat voel of hy of sy vergeet word. En die jongste? Wel, die een is glo die meeste pret. Maar hoeveel waarheid steek daar eintlik in geboortevolgorde teenoor persoonlikheid? Ons het by die kliniese sielkundige Hein Hofmeyer gehoor of daar werklik waarheid in hierdie teorie steek.
Dankie dat jy weer by ons aansluit.
Goeiemôre Elsa, altyd lekker om julle te gesels.
Goed, Hein, sê vir my, is daar werklik waarheid in die idee dat jou plek in die ry jou persoonlikheid beïnvloed wanneer 'n mens fokus op iets soos 'n gesin?
Ja en nee, ek dink soos jy nou daai stereotype sê, ons almal ken daai grappies. Die oudste is die verantwoordelike en die middelkind vergeet dit, die jongste kom met alles weg. Maar ernstig ernstig is daar dat maar die navorsing stem nie altyd lekker saam met daai nie. Die navorsing sê die geboortevolgorde bepaal eintlik nie jou persoonlikheid nie. Maar wat dit eintlik doen is dat dit jou ervaring binne die gesin kan beïnvloed. Die eerste kind het byvoorbeeld vir 'n tyd lank 'n ma en 'n pa heeltemal vir homself. Die tweede kind is vandag een van die huisgebore waar daar reeds 'n ander kind is en die derde kind kom al klaar in 'n gevestigde gesin in. So ek sal eerder sê geboortevolgorde beïnvloed die omgewing waarin jy groot word, eerder as wat dit eintlik bepaal wie jy gaan word.
En hoe groot sou jy sê is die rol dan wat ouers in die proses speel?
Beslis 'n massiewe rol, maar ek dink die belangrike ding wat ons moet weet hierso, wat ouers moet hoor is, dat jy is nie dieselfde met elke kind nie. Ons ken daai. Elke kind word jy amper half anderste mee en jy kom agter jou, net hoe jy met hulle praat is anderste. Met die eerste kind is dit altyd die eerste keer en ek onthou ook dat jy steriliseer amper die dummy nog voor dit na die vloer toe kyk. So, maar jy teen die derde kind val die dummy in die modder en jy vee dit net in jou hemp af en jy gee dit terug. So, daar is definitief hierdie verskil hoe ons met die ouers werk. Hulle is meer versigtig en angstig met die eerste kind, maar later het hulle meer ervaring en meer selfvertroue en dan is daar ook minder tyd om op elke individuele kind te fokus wanneer daar 3 kinders in die huis is. So die kinders het ons nou gesê is verskillend, so ons moet ook onthou dat die persoonlikheid wat hulle al reeds het, wat nie noodwendig geskep is deur die geboortevolgorde nie, maar net hulle persoonlikheid, 'n rustige kind en 'n baie impulsiewe kind gaan van selfsprekend verskillende reaksies by die ouers uitlok. So ek dink wat ek wil wegvat daar is dat dit werk beide kante toe. Ouers vorm kinders op 'n manier, maar kinders vorm ook hoe hulle geouer word deur die ouers.
Nou ek's baie opgewonde oor hierdie volgende vraag, want ons hoor altyd dat die oudste kind verantwoordelik, hardwerkend en so 'n bietjie perfeksionisties is, soms ook baie. Waar kom daardie beeld of prentjie vandaan?
Ek dink daar's 'n heel eenvoudige verklaring daarvoor. Die oudste kind hoor gereeld die volgende dinge. Jy is mos die oudste, jy is mos die groot een. Help jou boetie. Jy behoort van beter te weet. So daardie kind kry dikwels meer verantwoordelikheid wanneer dit word vir hom gegee deur sy ouers. So as jy vir 10 jaar lank daai boodskap kry dat jy die verantwoordelike een is dit dan nie vreemd dat jy jouself later sou begin sien nie. Maar dit beteken nie die oudste kind is gebore met 'n klein aktetas en 'n Excel spreadsheet nie. Die onderskeid is dis belangrik dat die ouer kind kry dikwels meer verantwoordelikheid, maar dit beteken nie die geboortevolgorde het hom so geneties meer verantwoordelik gemaak nie.
Nou nog iets waarvan 'n mens baie gereeld hoor is die sogenaamde middelkind-sindroom. So my vraag is, bestaan dit werklik?
Nie as 'n werklike sielkundige sindroom nie. Ons het nêrens in ons boeke 'n diagnose wat sê hy shame hierdie arme mense is 'n middelkind nie. Maar ek verstaan waar die idee vandaan kom. Die oudste is altyd ons eerste kind of ouers se eerste kind, die jongste is dikwels nog ons babietjie, maar die middelkind kan soms voel, okay, en wie is ek nou? Maar dit is nie noodwendig altyd negatief nie. Ek bedoel my middelkind, dis my en asook my vriende se, dis die loud kind, dis die harde kind. Alles is net extreme geraas. En die idee daarvan is dat daai gevoel van waar ek myself moet vind. En soos ons nou gesê, dis nie noodwendig altyd negatief nie, maar baie navorsing wys dat middelkinders en mense kan partykeer dan self sterker wees. En hulle kan samewerking leer om te probeer oor die weg kom. Die middelkind moet partykeer hierdie tegnieke leer van hoe moet ek tussen die oudste en die middelste, waar pas ek in en hoe moet ek myself aanpasbaar maak volgende situasie. So, miskien moet ons nie noodwendig die middelkind as die vergete kind sien nie, maar juis is dit die kind wat baie vroeër leer om te onderhandel. Dit probeer ek vir myself oorreed hoekom hy so manipulerend is, maar hoe hy onderhandel en aanpas en so ook 'n eie plek probeer vind.
Dis hierdie dinge is baie interessant, want ek dink dit is regtig, jy weet, dis dinge waarvan 'n mens so gereeld hoor, maar 'n mens weet nie regtig nie. Goed, maar nou wil ek aanbeweeg en vir jou vra, is daar enige waarheid daarin dat laat lammetjies meer vryheid geniet en dalk ook makliker risiko's neem?
Ek dink hier gaan baie ouers nou ewe skielik hulle koppe knik en lag en sê en absoluut. Teen die jongste kind het die ouers al baie ontspan. Die eerste kind mag dalk nie eers op die jungle gym geklim het sonder 'n helm nie en 2 volwassenes nie, maar die teen die derde kind kom jy net daaraan en as daar darm nie bloed is nie, is dit okay en jy laat hulle weer opstaan. Maar die navorsing ondersteun nie sterk die idee dat jongste kinders van selfs meer waghalsig of risikosoekend is nie. Weer eens op 'n genetiese vlak of so nie, maar wat wel kan gebeur is dat hulle definitief nie meer vryheid en meer blootstelling kry. Hulle sien wat doen die ouer kinders en dan probeer hulle dit ook. So hulle sien ook die ouerskapstyle dat maar Boetie kry dit reg as hy dit so doen en hulle leer dan weer eens ook hoe kan ek die stelsel gebruik om vir my dit meer te kan leer. So daar is definitief die idee dat die laaste kinders is meer waghalsig en definitief het meer vryheid, maar dis omdat die stelsel dit hulle toelaat om dit so te kan doen.
Nou Hein, wat van kinders wat sonder sibbe groot word, jy weet, hoe beïnvloed dit hulle ontwikkeling?
Wel, as jy na my kyk, is ek 'n wonderlike voorbeeld van hoe wonderlik alleen kinders kan wees. Maar daar's 'n onregverdige stereotype rondom die enigste kinders. Daar's gewoonlik hierdie idee dat hulle is bederf, hulle selfsugtig of hulle self sosiaal ongemaklik kan wees. Nou, daai navorsing weer eens ondersteun dit nie. Hierdie is 'n stereotypes wat ons het en die stereotypes verstaan ons kom van 'n plek af, maar die enigste kinders kan net so goed sosiaal en emosioneel ontwikkel soos kinders met broers en susters. Hulle kry dikwels baie 1-tot-1 aandag van die volwassenes as dit 'n goeie volwasse stelsel is en dit kan hulle baie help met akademie en dit kan hulle baie help met ontwikkeling en dit maak hulle eintlik om vinniger te leer hoe om goeie gesprekke met volwassenes te kan hê. Maar wat hulle dan wel nou nie elke dag by die huis het nie, is daardie broer en suster oefenkamp. Dis my remote, jy sit alweer aan my kant. Mamma, hy kyk vir my, hulle leer dit nie sommer nie, maar partykeer kan hulle dit by die skole kry, maar daai interaksie is wel iets wat tekort kom en hulle gaan nie noodwendig 'n swakker ontwikkelingspad hê nie, hulle het net 'n ander ene.
Ek moet vir jou sê, ek dink nou dadelik, ek lag, want ek wonder partykeer hoe dit in ons grimeerkunstenaar op Stel se huis gaan, wanneer die sibbes waarskynlik, jy weet, dalk so 'n bietjie woorde wissel. Ek weet ook nie of dit gebeur nie, maar ek kan net dink dat dit iets baie naby aan 'n komedie kan wees. Maar as iemand dalk nou hierna luister en dink, dis presies my gesin, moet ons hierdie stereotypes ernstig opneem, of is elke kind maar uiteindelik bloot sy of haar eie mens? Ons het so 'n minuut oor.
Ek dink ons kan lekker lag daaroor en is iets wat ons in onsself kan raak sien. Want ons daai stereotypes is daar. Ek kan dit duidelik sien met my kinders ook, maar ons moet versigtig wees om 'n etikette verklaring te maak. Die kind se persoonlikheid word deur baie dinge gevorm. Een van die interessante dinge is ook dat twee kinders wat in dieselfde huis groot word ook nie eers noodwendig dieselfde is nie. So ek sou eerder sê geboortevolgorde gee jou dalk 'n sekere plek aan die familietafel, maar dit besluit nie hoe jy gaan opstaan en hoe jy gaan groot word nie.
Hein, baie dankie vir jou insig wat jy weer eens met ons gedeel het. Ek dink dit bly 'n interessante onderwerp en ek is seker of van almal verstaan dit nou baie beter. Ons gesels hopelik gou weer.
Ons is net hierna terug met 'n bietjie sport. So, moenie weggaan nie.
Hallo, my naam is Maggie Trotsky. Jy kyk Goeiemôre, Good Morning.
Hey guys, dis Eerten en jy kyk Goeiemôre, Good Morning.
Hallo, ek is Corlia en jy kyk na Goeiemôre, Good Morning.
Tatiana Tomatos het onlangs by die onder 17 wêreldkampioenskappe vir moderne vyfkamp in Litouw goud ingepalm. Sy tans in Kaïro, Egipte, waar sy vir die onder 19 wêreldkampioenskappe, wat later van dese maand in Madrid plaasvind, voorberei. Sy het die week uit Kaïro met ons gesels.
Congratulations and thank you so much for your time. When you went across the line, what went through your mind when you realized you were an under 17 world champion?
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me today. When I crossed the line, it didn't hit me quite yet. About 10 minutes afterwards, I realized what I have just done, and I was actually so shocked, and I was so happy that all my hard work really paid off, and it was just such an amazing feeling.
So your gold medal came after that incredible laser run of yours. Was that part of the plan, or did the race just develop that way naturally for you, organically almost?
Honestly, I was actually so happy with silver already, but the last 2 laps, my coach started motivating me to just fight for the gold and just go for it. And I just did, and I just pushed myself all the way to the limit, and the crowd just brought me home, and I got the gold. It was just amazing.
Quite clearly it was. Obviously, your coach plays a massive role in what you do. Talk to us about what he means to you from the sidelines and obviously during your training.
He's quite a new coach to me. He started coaching me this year in Cairo, and we have such a strong bond, and I just trust him so much. Like, he just is so amazing, and he's more than a coach. He helps with everything, and I'm just so grateful to have him.
Modern pentathlon requires you to master fencing. There's the obstacle racing, swimming, and the laser run. Which discipline is your biggest strength? Firstly, let's start there.
The running has always been my biggest strength. It's also one of my favorite disciplines, so I would definitely say the running.
And dare I ask, which one still needs a little bit of work?
A lot of them. Pentathlon, you're constantly going to have a weaker discipline, and you're always going to be working on that weaker discipline until it's not weak anymore. But then you have a new weaker discipline, so you're constantly building and getting everything better together.
Just explain to our viewers exactly what the modern pentathlon is all about. I mean, you've got the 5 disciplines, but how does it all work together?
I would say the fencing is very important because it puts you in a really nice, strong position. And obstacle course racing, it's a lot of fun, and it kind of maintains your position if you do a clean run with no falling. Same with the swimming. If you do a nice fast time, it also just maintains your position. But the laser run is the most important because you start with a staggered start with how many points behind you are. And that's when you can really gain positions and work towards a medal. But the shooting is very difficult because you're out of breath and you have to concentrate and stay still and not worry about the other people in your race.
I was going to ask you about that. That's obviously one of the really tough parts of the laser run is that you've run hard, you're anaerobic, you are really breathing very deeply. How do you settle that down? Because that's one of the arts of modern pentathlon, isn't it?
Yes, a lot of practice to get my breathing controlled, but I just try and focus on my gun and myself. I don't worry about anyone else behind me or next to me. Just to focus on myself and keep myself calm really does help.
I want to try and get into your head here. How do you actually do that? How do you actually slow your breathing and as a result your heart rate down when you've got to do the laser run and the shooting?
I just focus on my breathing, take slow, steady breaths, but honestly, I'm still very out of breath when I get to the shooting, so...
I understand that completely. You were already a world champion bronze medalist in 2025. How did that last year's medal at the World Champs prepare you for what you won just a while ago? And of course, obviously, what you're now preparing for in Cairo?
Honestly, last year, it was a lot easier because it was on my home soil and there weren't as many European countries competing, and Europe is very good. So I knew this year was going to be a lot harder because there were a lot of European nations and a lot of strong girls. So I didn't really go with the expectation to win a gold. I went there to just improve on every discipline, and I somehow won.
I see that you're outside, and I just saw a runner go by. Are you already on a track there? Are you already training? Are you?
Yes, I have swimming after this, but everyone else is running today now.
It looks like it's beautiful there. You've achieved a heck of a lot already at a very young age. When did you first realize that you have the potential to become a world-class pentathlete?
When I was 13, I started doing my first international pentathlon, and I absolutely fell in love with the sport, and I knew that I wanted to continue doing pentathlon. But I still consider myself in the development stage. So, yes, but I'll continue doing this forever.
So it sounds to me like between the lines you saying that this is just the beginning. You haven't even really hit your straps yet. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
Brilliant. What does it mean for a South African, a young South African such as yourself, to stand on the top step of the podium and then hear Nkosi Sikeleli play just for you?
Wow, in that moment, it really sunk in. Like, I was just like, wow, I actually did this. And it was just a very emotional moment. And I was trying not to look at my mom because I knew the emotions would take over.
Were you able to control it?
Yes.
Glad to hear that. So you've competed against athletes from all over the world already, and the experience obviously is stacking up. Where do you think we rank as far as South African pentathletes are concerned on the international stage?
I would consider that South Africa is a developing country with pentathlon because we're quite new to it, but we're definitely improving every year. Every year we're always getting better and better. So I'm actually very proud of us.
And so you should be, but you're pioneering and you're leading there. So congratulations on that. We really see that and we laud you for it. Modern pentathlon has changed significantly with obstacle racing replacing horse riding. Do you enjoy the new format, and what do you think makes that more exciting for our spectators?
I was never able to do the horse riding because I was too young, but I'm so happy that they changed it to obstacle course racing because the feeling of flying through the obstacles is so amazing. And it's also just so much fun to watch. It's definitely like my favorite discipline to watch. It's just amazing.
Again, please explain to our viewers, when you say obstacle racing, give us an insight into some of the obstacles that you have to face.
We have to face monkey bars, rings, balance beam. I would say the rings are my favorite because you just fly through it very, like in the air, and it's amazing.
So Tatiana Tomatos is now a world champion. What's next?
I have under-19 World Championships coming up, and after that I'm going to take a small break, and then I'll start preparing for the new season. And my coaches have a very busy and exciting year planned for me next year with lots of competitions, and I trust that they will lead me to all my goals.
I really believe that is around the corner for you. Tatiana, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate that very much. And keep the South African flag flying. Train hard there in Cairo.
Thank you so much.
Bly waar julle is. Net hierna kyk ons na die gesprek wat Lisa gehad het oor Suid-Afrika se nasionale barista kampioenskappe.
Goeiemôre, good morning.
Suid-Afrika se nasionale barista kampioen, Musa Mosekile, het die week kom kuier. Hy is tans besig met voorbereidings om Suid-Afrika by die EMEA kampioenskappe in Londen te verteenwoordig, waar hy teen van die beste baristas in die streek sal meeding. Ons gesels met hom oor sy oorwinning by die nasionale eindstryd by Starbucks Reserve in Melrose Arch. Die mense wat hom inspireer en wat dit verg om 'n eenvoudige koppie koffie in 'n ware koneksie te verander.
Morning Musa, how are you?
Good morning, everyone. I'm fine, thanks, and yourselves.
I'm doing great. So let's start at the beginning. How is it that you became a barista?
So it all started back in 2023 when I found myself facing some issues with university. I had some financial issues. So that's when I realized that I had to do something else with my life, or in the meantime. So that's how I presented myself to Starbucks Gateway to be specific. It was October, November in 2023, and that's where the whole journey started, basically.
That's so cool. So tell us about the national finals at Starbucks Reserve. How did you decide you were going to compete?
So throughout my years of working as a barista, I've been getting a lot of comments from guests and especially from our partners as well, encouraging me to take part in Starbucks championships. So I was skeptical at first, but I had to do it, do it for myself and for the people who believed in me, from partners in store to my store manager, my district manager, Mr. Sanesh. Teams was being there throughout the journey, And now I have the whole of South Africa as my support system. So it's been a beautiful journey so far.
Oh, that's so nice. So you've said that for you, this championship isn't really about the trophy now. You said it's connecting with people. But what exactly does that connection look like when you're behind the coffee counter?
So for me, coming to work has turned into something I look forward to every single day. Every shift has brought in a new piece of information towards me as an individual, and every piece of that information has fueled my personal and professional development, which is why my job has basically turned into my craft. So yeah, it's something worth looking forward to, basically.
And your winning drink is the Caramel Comfort Cold Brew, and it was inspired by your mom. Tell us a little bit about the drink and how she influenced it.
Yes. So the Caramel Comforts Cold Brew is a deeply personal tribute to the nurturing nature of my adorable mother. Look, I've always wanted to make her proud, especially reflecting on the hard work she's put and towards making me become the person that I am today, especially from a young guy coming from the township. I've got a solid foundation which has shaped me being the person that I am today. So each ingredient in that drink says something about her, which turns the whole experience into giving you a hug in a mug, basically.
Oh, well, you said now about the ingredients, and there are quite a few elements to this drink. Did you know exactly what you wanted from the start, or was it a lot of experimenting?
So definitely a lot of experimenting as well. But from the get-go, I knew I wanted to do something for her as my mother, as a deeply personal tribute, which of course came with a lot of experimenting in the meantime. Starbucks and Hillcrest store partners, we're buzzing with coffee. Me and Teddy, we're buzzing with coffee, drinking coffee every single day. But hey, the drink basically is a picture of my mother, and yeah, it definitely came with a lot of experimenting. I don't want to lie, but it came out to be good. The outcome, yes.
And you joined Starbucks in 2023, but now you're heading to London in September for the EMEA Championship. Are you excited, nervous, or a bit of both?
Well, I'm excited. Mostly I'm excited. The nerves are starting to kick in as the days are, but definitely I'm excited, and I'm looking forward to meeting other barista champions, meeting other enthusiastic people who I really believe will even grow me even as an individual. And I'm also looking forward to traveling the world while doing exactly what I love doing almost every single day, which is making coffee.
Oh, yes, and I heard you're also going to be visiting the Starbucks coffee roasting plant in Amsterdam. What are you hoping to learn from that experience?
Yes. I'm hoping to learn what is it that Starbucks roasters and blenders put, or what's their secret ingredients, which is one of the questions that I really like to ask them. What's their secret ingredients that makes our guests here at Starbucks come back for a cup of coffee that just feels better than the one they had yesterday? Because there has to be a secret somewhere, somehow. So I'm also just looking to learn more about roasting coffee from the first 10 feet to the middle 10 feet, which is the roasters, and how the journey comes to us as the last 10 feet, which is the baristas.
Well, look, you're such an incredible influence. Where do you get the power and the strength to stand up each morning and be such a great influence on your environment and your social surroundings?
So for me, it started with the people around me. They really showed me that they believe in me. And when the people around you believe in you, that even grows your confidence, even as an individual. Because for me, before Starbucks, I was sort of like an introvert who's always alone. I've never spoken in front of people. But because of the confidence I've had from the people around me. I think that's really shaped me into being the barrister that I am today. So yeah, the support system around me, it's another thing, I'm telling you.
Oh, that's
People
wonderful.
are rooting for me, which is beautiful.
Yes, and so now
From
you've
the store
reached this
manager.
level. Do you still enjoy making yourself a normal cup of coffee at home? What's the secret ingredient at home?
Well, I'm not a fussy person, so I still do enjoy myself a cup of coffee at home. But I had the privilege of winning my own brewing method in the Starbucks National Championships. So, and I also had a coffee. So now I can just brew myself a beautiful pour over at home, and I really enjoy it. So yeah.
Oh, and you're inviting all your friends to come and join you.
Oh yes, I'm even showing him the brewing techniques, how to actually brew coffee. I'm actually brewing some baristas even in the community.
That is so great. Well, Musa, thank you so much for joining us today and good luck with the championship. We are rooting for you all the way here in South Africa.
Net hierna kyk ons terug na my gesprek met Suid-Afrikaanse sanger en liedjie-skrywer Lee Cole. Moenie weggaan nie. Suid-Afrikaanse sanger en liedjie-skrywer Lee Cole het hierdie week kom kuier om te gesels oor sy nuwe enkelsnit, Fool.
Maybe I'm a fool for hoping like I should. 'Cause lately I've been waiting for the better half of me to burn. Maybe I'm a fool to love you like I do, to love you like I do. Throw all my fears away as I lie in the ruins of waste. Changed what I thought had changed, but it's hard when you don't feel the same. Hating you ain't easy, so forgetting you is never in the plan. So maybe I'm a fool for hoping like I should. 'Cause lately I've been waiting for the better half of me to burn. Maybe I'm a fool to love you like I do, to love you like I do, to love you like I do, to love you like I do.
Certainly that's going to get you into the mood. We've just watched South African singer and songwriter Lee Cole's new single, Fool, ahead of his upcoming EP, Letters to Myself. And he's here to tell us more about this. Welcome, Lee. Fabulous having you here this morning.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
As we always say, goeiemorgen, good morning.
Goeiemorgen, good morning. I remember that.
Lovely song. Is a song about fooling yourself, about someone's feelings for you. Why and when and how did this happen?
I have such a bad and good. It served me well. A good habit of writing just love songs, heartbreak songs, and songs that I think a message it can resonate with people. You know, so the song's one of those songs, and it's about that. It's about realizing you could be the fool.
And I mean, obviously, it's the case because always we think this is now the one, but you know it's not working, but you try to hold on to it.
You don't want to cut your losses, you know,
Yeah.
if you invested too much. And I think people experience that quite often. Yeah.
You worked on Fool for a number of years. I mean, what kept you coming back or leaving it for a while and then deciding, okay, now's the time?
The music business can be a little bit funny, especially the songwriting business. I think you'll write a song and you'll kind of get to something very quickly, and then some part of it doesn't feel right. And sometimes you can't rush it. You've got to let the song just sit, let it settle. And then sometimes you'll find the missing piece maybe a couple of months later, and that was the case with Full.
And I mean, apart from all the other great songs that you have written and released, you reckon that this is described as your most polished song?
I hope so.
Now? Up
I
to
hope
date?
so. Yeah. I would say so. I think in like with songwriting, it's a skill that really tends to get better over time. You start to learn new tricks and new things, and especially with production, you start to meet new people that are more qualified than you, and you pull from like a wealth of experience that can only benefit you as an artist. And I think Full is an amalgamation of all these years of hard work and connecting with people, for sure.
And I mean, apart from all the experiences that you say or just mentioned, I mean, you have been along the stage or on opening for people like Robbie Williams, and how must that have been? Something special.
Mind blowing. I think at Sunbet, it's one of the experiences I'll never forget. It was just like a reminder that everything that you're working towards is eventually comes at you when the time is right. I think just standing there when I walked onto stage and just seeing 10,000 people and they're singing your song, it was a pinch me moment for sure. Yeah.
Well, earlier on we discussed about plans on getting Arnie to sing the national anthem for South Africa.
Yeah.
I mean, Robbie Williams, if I have the decision or the chance to choose, you two at Portugal with Prime Circle as well.
That's right. Yeah, a couple of international shows, and it's there's a saying in Portuguese, because I'm Portuguese. It's crumb by crumb makes bread. And in this industry, it really feels like that a lot of the time.
How true is
You'll
that?
do a lot of shows and you'll release a lot of songs, and eventually it kind of all comes together to the bigger picture. Yeah.
Listen, while writing or recording this song eventually, was there a time when you thought, okay, listening to the production or the strings or the this or that, when you said, this is the one, now this is what I want?
Yes, for sure. Especially with Full, I would, we kind of wrote the chorus, and then when we started putting the strings together, it sounded so pretty and so like it just like drew you in the whole time. And that's when I was like, I think this is gonna make people feel something. Because when you're writing a song, that's what you're chasing. You're chasing a specific emotion, or you want to invoke a specific feeling in somebody. So I think we managed to nail that in the end.
Well, you definitely nailed it, and I think listening to your voice as well, this is definitely the genre for you.
Thank you.
Being an artist, you would always like to do all the different genres.
Yes.
But this is definitely working for you. Tell me a little bit more about the EP, Letters to Myself.
Yeah, it's since the beginning of my career, I've kind of just been releasing a steady single at a time. But now I wanted to kind of throw myself at a bigger project, something that would tell a bigger story. And also I've been in the industry like professionally now and doing my thing for about 6 years. So it's not the longest time, but it's a little bit of time for me to sit back and reflect and be like, okay, I've learned this. No, don't do this. And I kind of want to share that with people. It's a little memoir of where I'm at as an artist, and I hope people can sort of take something from that. Yeah.
You're obviously trying to worry less about whether a song is going to be successful, and then obviously just enjoy writing the song, doing your thing. If it's successful, it's good. If it's not,
I promise you, I'm learning that more and more and more. The more I think you kind of try to chase a specific level of success, it's like, it's a weird example, but I tell my mom all the time, it's like, like everyone's got like a speck in their eye.
Yeah.
Like that little dot, and every time you look at it, like it moves. But when you don't try and look at it, is when you can see it.
How amazing is
and
that?
I feel the same thing about music. It's like you need to do something that you love, and the rest kind of falls into place, and not the other way around.
That's why one starts in this business, you know, writing the song, doing what you love, and you want to share it with people.
From the heart. Yeah.
But Young, it can be tough as well, because it's also always this success-driven thing.
It is, and it's never enough.
Yeah.
It's never enough.
But what is enough? Sitting backstage, taking it all in, enjoying it in front of all these loads of people, going back home?
I would say what is enough is the family, the connection with the family. I think it's, even after the Robbie Williams thing, it's like, I was Sunbet Arena, I'm putting my gear in my car, I'm coming back home. And then when I got home, my grand's there, my mom's there, my dad's there, my brother. And I'm just standing with them, and we like, with tears in our eyes, we're like, oh, crazy, like that just happened.
Amazing.
But it's sharing those moments of achievement, those moments with the people that you love, that actually really means anything. And I think a lot of people that have been in this kind of industry will tell you that's where the magic really is.
So what's next? Who's the next opener, or you going to open for next? And
From your lips to God's ears. Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's my goal. It's always been to sell out my own headline show.
Yeah.
And in Europe or in America, wherever the road takes me. But I'm not stopping for sure. And I think this EP will be, I think it's going to be a start of something really, really cool.
I'm sure.
I'm in for the ride.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
You're certainly not a fool. Dit is dan al vir hierdie week. Ons sien julle maandagooggend klokslag weer om 6:00. Lekker naweek.
Ek is Rian Benari en jy kyk Goeiemôre Good Morning.
Hey guys, Ayrton en jy kyk Goeiemôre Good Morning.